Why do men grow beards? What do they look like? Where do they come from? In this video I'm gone? Nah. Try and answer some of those questions because the truth is, beards have been around for as long as humans have been around. And in fact, the earliest evidence of beard grooming comes from as far back as 150,000 years ago in the form of a lion. Man figurine carved from a mammoth tusk that was found in Siberia. The figurine depicts a man wearing a lion skin with two symmetrical holes cut out for his eyes, whiskers extending down from them, mimicking the look of a cat. This, along with other figurines like it, are considered by some to be the first examples of body art ever created by humans. And while it's up for debate whether or not these early humans actually had beards, the fact that they would carve these images onto objects implies that facial hair has always held some kind of significance. Sometime after that, during the last ice age, the bones of a man who we now call the Chekelnik man were discovered. He was an early modern human whose skeleton dates back about 38,000 years. And when archaeologists examined his skull, they found evidence of distinct bald spots on either side of his face, where he had tied back his beard to expose his jawline, suggesting that early humans had already started experimenting with styles. And while the ancient Egyptians are usually the first civilization people think of when they hear the word beard, the oldest evidence of bearded men actually comes from even further away. In present-day Iran, at a place called Shanidar Cave, there was once a Neanderthal settlement. And there they left behind a burial site that dates back roughly 60,000 years. The skeletal remains of several adults were discovered inside the cave, including one adult male whose teeth were found to have very high levels of a chemical called strontium. And what that meant is that this guy had spent most of his life outside of the region where the cave is located, indicating that he may have traveled great distances. Some researchers also noted how his brow ridge was more pronounced than other males from the same site, which could suggest that he was an older male. But the real evidence that got everyone's attention was a scraping tool made from a deer femur that was found buried alongside him. It's believed that this tool could have been used to scratch and shape his beard into a particular style, and it's considered to be the oldest example of a personal grooming tool ever discovered. So while we don't have any actual examples of their hairstyles, we can make educated guesses based on the tools they used to maintain them. A vase dating back about 9,000 years was found with what appears to be a thick brush, which could have been used to keep the hair on their heads or on their faces neat and orderly. Another theory is that they wore their beards long and braided, similar to the Nubian men that lived in Egypt thousands of years later. And there's some evidence to support this idea too, because another burial site that dates back about 8,000 years was found in Israel. And it included the skeleton of a man who appeared to have worn a leather headband. Similar headbands were typically used to hold back long braids, which is why many researchers believe that the person buried in the cave may have done the same thing with his beard. As the centuries rolled on, beards became more and more popular in Egypt. A lot of this has to do with a pharaoh named Akhenaten, who ruled from 1353 to 1336 BC. Before him, Egyptian rulers kept their beards shaved clean, but he changed all that when he took the throne. His statues depict him with a large, bushy beard that reaches down to his chest. And it's likely that he started this trend so that he could appear more like the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. After him, the next four pharaohs also wore long beards, which led to an overall shift in the culture. Egyptian men began to see facial hair as a sign of masculinity and power. It was typical for them to shave their beards very close to their faces, almost like stubble, to make themselves look more intimidating. But regardless of the length, it was common for them to braid their beards and then tie them off with a decorative clasp, just like they did with their hair. Women in Egypt didn't typically grow facial hair, but if they did, they were expected to keep it hidden. The only exception was Queen Hatshepsut, who was the fifth pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, and she ruled from 1478 to 1458 BC. Her statues show her with a full beard, and while it's unclear whether or not she actually had one, it's safe to say that she chose to be depicted with a beard, so that she could appear more powerful as a female ruler. In Egypt, being seen as strong was very important, so she would have known exactly what that meant for her legacy. In modern times, some people believe that black women can't rock a beard because they're too coarse and wiry. But back in ancient Egypt, black women sported facial hair, just like the men did. They would groom their beards, curl them, and even highlight them with gold to make them stand out. Moving away from Egypt and moving north into Europe, we run into the Roman Empire. By this point, long beards were generally favored across many different cultures. The Scythians, for instance, were a nomadic tribe that lived somewhere between Ukraine and Central Asia, and the men in this society preferred to wear their beards very long. Their ideal length was below the chest, and they would often braid them or twist them into ropes. Meanwhile, the Celts preferred to wear their beards shorter, but they were still noticeably long enough to be braided. The Greeks fell somewhere in the middle. They preferred medium-length beards that could be neatly trimmed and shaped into a variety of styles. However, the Romans would take things in a completely different direction. When Rome was founded in 753 BC, their culture was much like the Greeks. Men would shape their beards into certain styles, and they viewed long, flowing facial hair as something to be admired. But as the empire grew and their military became more dominant, their views on beards began to change. Facial hair was associated with barbarians, so instead of embracing beards, Roman men began to shave their faces clean. This trend continued for hundreds of years until the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD, and while long beards were no longer fashionable by this point, short stubble beards were still common. Next, we travel south to Africa, where the Dogon people had a rich tradition of growing long beards. To them, a man's beard represented his social status and was seen as a symbol of masculinity. In order to grow their beards, the men would pluck out their unwanted body hair and redirect that energy to their facial hair. Once a man reached adulthood, he would start growing a beard, and he wouldn't shave again until he became a father. At that point, he would shave it all off, so that he would then pass on the tradition to his young son. And finally, we move forward in time to the Middle Ages. During this period, the Christian church had a huge influence on European culture, and their beliefs trickled down into nearly every aspect of daily life. Growing a beard during this time was seen as a way to honor God, but you couldn't just grow it however you wanted. Your beard had to be well-groomed and neatly trimmed, so that it didn't become wild and unruly. Long, unkempt beards were seen as something filthy and disgusting. And in 1569, Pope Pius V went as far as to declare that all priests and monks must shave their beards twice a week. But even though the church encouraged men to grow beards, they didn't encourage women to do the same. Back then, it was believed that growing a beard was a sign of witchcraft, and women who dared to sport facial hair were persecuted as evil. The truth is, over the past few thousand years, beards have played a role in almost every culture. They've been associated with everything from religion and tradition to politics and power. No matter where you go in the world, you'll find examples of people with beards and the stories behind them. I'm just glad we don't live in a time where we prejudge by how long our beards are. That would be really stupid. Hey, please don't forget to subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching. Peace.